All right, we're going to go over more JavaScript examples today. We're going to start out by reviewing the ones that we went over last time, the one that we went over last time. I think we just did one. And then we'll go over a similar one, and then we'll go from there. I really want to get you to understand sort of the basic mode of many of the JavaScript interactions that occur. And I talked about this last time, but just to review. The user takes some action. Now, keep in mind that this is not 100%. You can't describe anything in programming as 100% of the time, but this is a typical JavaScript interaction. The first part is the user takes some action. And what do I mean by some action? I mean, they interact with the page in some way or another. They press a key, for example, or they click on something, or they put their mouse over something. They change a value in a text box. All these things are user interactions. Now, and these are called events. And these user events are often used to trigger some JavaScript. So the ball gets rolling when one of these user events occurs. And these events are going to trigger some JavaScript. Now, there's other events that can occur as well that aren't related to a user interaction. For example, you could have an event that occurs when the page is finished loading, for one example. And that can be very useful for things. But keep in mind, most of the interactions that we're going to consider are triggered by some user event. And I think we looked at a list of JavaScript events last time. You can Google JavaScript events to see what's available. Let's look at this one. This looks just like W3 schools. Happy. Click, right mouse click, mouse over, mouse out, mouse up, mouse down. You actually can have different code that happens when the user presses a mouse down as opposed to when they lift up their mouse. Mouse move, you can trigger some things to occur when the mouse is moved. Key down or key up, same thing. You can trigger when the key is originally pressed or when the key is released again. On submit, when the form is submitted. On focus, when the user enters an element, and so on. These are all events that occur, and they are typically going to be used to trigger some JavaScript. JavaScript uses the DOM. And DOM is short for Document Object Model. Document Object Model is a way to refer to items or elements on the web page. So when the user clicks on something, we want to do something to something else. In our example last time, when the user clicked on a button, I believe it was, we wanted to show a section of the page. We're going to have a workhorse here. This is not the only way that we can refer to elements on a page. We can refer to items on a page several different ways. But we're going to use one way in particular because I think it's the most straightforward one. And that is going to be document. And be very careful here because the case is important. Get element by ID. Then in parentheses, you put the actual ID of the thing that you are going to do something with. We're going to use that a lot. All right. Why do we use that? Well, it is very straightforward. There ought to be only one thing on a page that has an ID of ID. All right. Whatever the ID we give it. So therefore, it's going to point to something specific on the page. You should not have two things on the page with the same ID. If you do, that will cause trouble. So this is a way that we can refer to things on the page. And then we have the JavaScript language that can do a lot of stuff. But typically, the way we're going to use it in our examples is it's going to change either the CSS of the page or the HTML of the page. So the example we went over last time, I think, was this one. Put our mouse over and we show the spoiler. We take our mouse out, it hides it. Put our mouse over, shows the spoiler. Take our mouse out, hides it. Let's just spend a minute reviewing that one and keeping in mind sort of the guidelines that I talked about a minute ago. The event, it's on an element. It's on the paragraph element. So we put that event over the thing that the user is going to interact with. In this case, when they put their mouse over the paragraph, this on mouse over event kicks in. So that triggers a JavaScript. Also triggers a JavaScript is on mouse out. So this happens when the mouse goes into the paragraph. This happens when the mouse goes out. What are we going to do? That's included in this JavaScript statement within the quotes. Now, ID we put in quotes here because that's literal. It's not a variable called spoiler1. It's the actual literal characters spoiler1. And we have to use different quote marks because if we use double quotes here, the browser would think that the statement ended here. And that's not a complete JavaScript statement. So we use within the double quotes, we use the single quotes to indicate what's called a literal. So find on the page the thing that has an ID of spoiler1. That's this paragraph here. Change its style to have a display attribute of block. In the CSS, we have for all the paragraphs that are tagged with a class of spoiler, we make them not visible. When we go the mouse over that, this, we change that style to block. Now, this is the same attribute as this. It's part of the style for that element, and it's the display property of this element. So it's not like we use different syntax from here and here. So if you know the CSS code for it, the JavaScript code is going to be simple. It's going to be document get element by ID dot style dot whatever the attribute is. The one exception to that is when things contain a dash. So in CSS, we say background color In JavaScript, we would say background color. So there's one little change that happens in the JavaScript comparing CSS code versus a JavaScript attribute. Other than that, the rest of it's the same. Now, what attributes can we change? We can change any of them. All right, we can change any of them. So we could, for example, change the color or make it visible and change the color. If you're using Visual Studio Code, it's nice enough to give you examples of what the properties are. So you can save this, refresh this page, and we not only make it visible, we make the background color yellow. Font size. Again, that would be normally font dash size in CSS. But we would use font size if I remember how to type. And we can give it an attribute of 2M, make it twice as big as normal. Make it a lot bigger than normal, and then we can go for there. What's another way to make spoilers? If we didn't want to use the visibility, we could give this initially a background color of black. And we have black font on a black background. Mouse goes over it. All right. So let's look at another example. One thing you might notice here is as I keep adding instructions in here, the code starts getting a little messier. And this would be especially true if we had other kinds of code in there too. Remember, this is not the only JavaScript statement we're ever going to have. We're going to have other sorts of JavaScript statement. JavaScript is a full-blown programming language. You can have if statements, you can have loops, you can do math in it, you can do virtually everything that you can do in other programming languages. It's just tied to a web page. Now, one distinction I do want to make, because a lot of times you hear beginners make this mistake, is referring to JavaScript as Java. JavaScript is not the same as Java. JavaScript is a browser-based scripting language. All right, the way we're going to use it is a browser-based scripting language that is like Java. That is, it has Java-like syntax, but it's not Java. There are ways to incorporate Java onto a web page, and those are typically done on the server side. But this is JavaScript, which is typically done client side. Now it's funny, I have to put things like typically and all that because JavaScript can also be used on the server side, but we're not going to be talking about that in this class. All right, so let's look at our next example. Show the spoiler. I don't have a button to hide it, and I can change the color of this. Not too exciting. Show spoiler. Let's see what the code is for that. Yeah, not too exciting at all. The difference, the main difference being that I'm using a button and the on-click event as opposed to using a paragraph in the mouse over event. I could make a button to hide spoiler if I wanted to. Pretty easy. Notice that this says it's a button and not a submit button. We don't want to send the code to the server. We don't want to send a request to the server. This is all happening on the client side. Therefore, we just want to trigger some JavaScript. So that's often what a button does, is it just triggers a piece of JavaScript. And I can make this none and for business. Show spoiler and hide it again. Now, one thing that I want to demonstrate is this. What happens if you have a syntax error? Well, JavaScript is different than HTML. HTML is very, very, very forgiving and is not very strict as far as how your code is formatted. So for example, let's go back to the first example to show this. For example, JavaScript is case sensitive. What do I mean by case sensitive? I mean that upper and lowercase counts. Whereas in CSS and HTML, it doesn't really matter. Get this back to where it was before. Trying to talk and type at the same time, and it's not working today. So for example, if I said P here, browser doesn't care, makes it a paragraph. Double paragraph. In fact, if I make this something that isn't a tag, really doesn't affect the way the code works. The browser takes a shot at displaying the page, even if your code is not correct. So there's a number of problems with this. Number one, there's no such thing as an ABC tag. Number two, the starting and ending tag doesn't match. Yet, it still works. Now, one disclaimer is that if you break the rules of HTML, there's a chance that you might have browser incompatibility issues. All right, so the best first step in making sure your code works across browsers is to make sure that you're following the rules of HTML. That's why for the one lab, I had you validate your HTML. That is, go to the W3 Schools, not W3 Schools, W3C's webpage, go to their validator and paste your code in. And it will tell you if you have followed the rules of HTML or not. Like if you have a missing tag or something along those lines. All right. Now, what was I getting at? Oh, so get element by ID is exactly like it's written here. If I do this, for example, if I forget and I say get element by ID and I use an uppercase D, guess what? It's not going to work. So let's make this with an uppercase D and see what happens. Shouldn't work. Oh, you know what? I'm not opening that file. I was opening the file contained in the zip file. There we go. So it doesn't work because I have get element by ID. Well, how do you figure that out? Especially if you have a long JavaScript function that, and we'll talk about functions in a few minutes here, that contains a lot of instructions. How do I figure out what went wrong? Well, every browser has this. I'll show you where it is in Chrome. You can find where it is elsewhere. You can go under More Tools, Developer Options, and look at the console, and it will tell you. Now, sometimes the errors that it gives are very clear. In this case, it pretty well says exactly what's wrong. It says the document get element by ID with a capital D is not a function in line 19 of the HTML. So I look at line 19 of the HTML. Or was that line 18? Line 19. Sometimes the line numbers aren't exact. It's around that. Well, I look and I can see, well, yeah, ID is incorrect. I can make it ID. Another thing, what if I give a spoiler that doesn't exist or a ID number that doesn't exist? It tells me cannot read property of null. That's a little more cryptic of an error message. And what that's telling you is that this statement failed. This statement did not find anything that matches this criteria. The thing on the page that has an ID of spoiler 1. Therefore, there's no such style or display property for nothing because this didn't find anything. Think of null as being nothing. So if you have a JavaScript error, the first thing that you should do is view the error console. And again, that might give you a very good description of what the error is. That might give you a very cryptic, but at least it points in the right direction of where the error is. All right, let's look at some other JavaScript examples. This is called color, even though it has nothing to do with color. Notice a couple things on this one. I only did it for menu item 1, but when I click on menu item 1, it brings up a submenu. And it shows you the things underneath it. That's one property that exists here, is I make this visible and invisible. And if I, right now, if I click on it, it hides it again. That's probably not good functionality, but we'll see what's causing that. I also have big text and normal text to change this back and forth between big text and normal text. So let's take a look at this. Now, again, for convenience purposes in this example, I put everything in the HTML file. That's not an endorsement of doing it this way, all right? You should still follow good rules and put the CSS in a separate file, and you can even put the JavaScript in its own file. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute here. All right. Let's look at this first off. I have a navigation section. Each section, I guess I did it for all three sections. Each section has a submenu to it. I have my main section, and I have my footer. Position them this way, header 100%, floated to the left, navigation 30%, floated to the left, section 40%, floated to the left. That'll put the section and nav side by side, and I have submenu, display of none. Okay, so let's look at the text first of all. I have two buttons. The big button, the big text button, when it's clicked, it finds the element called main with an ID of main. It's a section here. And sets the style font size to 2M. If I want normal text, I click this button and it takes it back to normal. Again, same recipe as before. We have an event, in this case on click event. We use the DOM, document get element by ID main. Change something about that. What are we changing about that? We're changing its style and we're changing its font size. And then what value? 2EM. Now again, to repeat this, this is enclosed in quotes, and this is because these are not variable names. We want this actual value to be plugged in. So this is changing it just as though we had set it up originally in the style to be that. Now, in this case, if we wrote this the way we wrote this or the way we did our other examples, we'd have a lot of repeated code. When you click on the button, or when you click on the LI, it would show the submenu for it. And that's about it. I lost my train of thought. I'm having a case of the Mondays, I think. When we click on the LI, it displays the submenu. All right. If we did this, it would display the other submenu. If we did this, it would display the other submenu. Actually, it doesn't display it all the time. If it's already showing, it hides it. So it toggles it, in other words. What do I mean by toggling it? I mean that if it's not visible, we make it visible. If it's visible, we make it invisible. So it's like a light switch. We can turn it on or off. Now, the code to do that isn't hard. but it's several instructions. We have to look to see if it's visible. If it's visible, we make it invisible. Otherwise, we make it visible. And would have the exact same code written here for submenu 1, would have the same code written, with the only difference is it would be for submenu 2. And then would, in this case, would have the same code written, only it would be for submenu 3. Well, that would make our HTML very messy. And what's more, if there was a bug in the code, we would have to fix it in 3 places. A primary rule of programming is, I don't know if I talk about it in this class or not. I talk about it in most of my classes. DRY.
Repeat yourself.
Do not repeat yourself. All right. So if I had this code and the only thing different was the submenu that we were hiding and showing, then that would be pretty much repeating myself. So what do? I group my statements together into what's called a function. All right. I group it into a function. And what is a function? A function is a set of statements that we're going to group together and call it one name, so that when we need to do those statements, we just give the name of the function. So up here, we have in a script tag is another place that we can put JavaScript statements besides events. We have a function declared called toggle menu. So that's a script tag. That means, hey, from here to here, we're in JavaScript land. And our function is called toggle menu. Now, we have these curly braces, which are used to group things together. So around the function, we have, around all the lines of code in the function, we have curly braces that says these instructions together make up the function. Notice also that I indented them to make it obvious at a glance that these are the instructions that are part of the function. Again, the browser will understand it if you don't indent it, but if you have to come back and make changes to the code, it will be very difficult if you haven't indented things properly. Now, we don't want this function to do the exact same thing every time. It's going to do similar things, but different. In this case, it's going to show or hide submenu 1. In this case, it's going to show or hide submenu 2. In this case, show or hide submenu 3. That's where an argument comes in. In other words, when we call this function, we have to tell it which submenu we want to show, or toggle, rather to be precise. We have to specify which submenu we want to toggle. It's just like in Excel. If you use a square root function, you go in Excel and you type in equals SQRT, I think. You can't just leave it at that, right? Square root of what? Square root of a number, square root of a cell. What do you want the square root of? You have to say. Same thing here. We have to say what submenu we want to toggle. And that's what we do here. And again, this is hard-coded. It's not a variable, therefore we put it in single quotes. Single quotes because, again, we use single quotes inside a JavaScript statement, which is enclosed in double quotes. Notice there's a semicolon after it too. That's not always absolutely required, but sometimes it is, and it's a good idea to put semicolons between this. So if we click on this LI, we show or hide submenu 1, 2, or 3. So let's look how this works. This has an if statement, and some of you have probably done programming before. And an if statement is a conditional where you branch between two options. In this case, our if is either going to be true or false. So if document get element by ID arg, now arg is not enclosed in quotes because that is a variable. The argument is a variable. So whatever value we give to arg is going to look to see, is that submenu currently visible? That's what this means. Is the style of it, is the display property of the style equal to block? And when we're doing a comparison, we use two equal signs to indicate comparison. The single equal sign indicates appearance, or assignment, rather. So here we're looking to see, is the thing that we clicked on, that's what's represented by arg. And when we call the function, we set that value. Is it currently being displayed? If it is, we hide it. If it's not, we show it. So that's how we get this. Click on it, show submenu 1, click on it, hide submenu 1. Now, there's a little bit of a bug in this, right? Now, these aren't real links, but imagine they were real links. If I expanded this section, as soon as I click on this, it makes the submenu disappear. I probably don't want that to happen. I probably want to go to that link, right? How would I fix that? Well, I would move the on-click, because the on-click is currently on the LI. So if I click anywhere on the LI, it's going to toggle the menu. I probably want to do this only when I click on this link. Probably want to do that here. Click on it. Now, if I click on what?
I think your A tag closed itself. Caret.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you. What am I doing here? That is one of the downsides of using Visual Studio Code, is it in its zeal to help you out, sometimes it does things that you don't necessarily want it to do. So let's try this. Doing it. Refresh the page. I know what it's doing. It is calling the page back up. It's going to the top of the page. Let's try putting an actual link in here. I make the same mistake I made before. I open the wrong file. Oh. I actually probably don't want that to be a link. It's a span. Oh, I'm opening the one that's in the. I was opening the one that was in the zip file. Yeah, I have two folders open down here. One of them is the actual one that I expanded and one is a zip file. I don't want the zip file, so I'll close that. There. Bottom line is if I move that event to the link instead of the LI, I get more of the behavior that I want. So that's the behavior I want. Now, what kind of errors can you run into here? Well, if you don't put the right number of matching things. Now in Visual Studio Code, notice it's color coded. In other words, this shows up, I don't know what you call that shade, a kind of dull orange or a yellow. That shows that this goes with that. Plus it puts a little box around it. If I forgot that, nothing happens. If I look at my console, it'll give me somewhat a cryptic error. It tells me at line 25, unexpected end of input. So that's kind of telling me it hit the end of the script, yet it was expecting something else. Now, because of that, these functions don't register with the browser. So it doesn't know what this function means anymore. Doesn't know what toggle menu is because toggle menu didn't load successfully. Now, throughout this, I've mentioned about how we can put JavaScript into a different file. So I'm going to do that now. I'll just call this toggle. And the nice thing is I could use this possibly on multiple pages. So I'll call that toggle. And then within my HTML, I'll say script course equals toggle.js. Save it. The unscript tag here. The JavaScript still works. One thing that we can do as a shortcut for having the ending tag is we can just put a slash here. That means this tag is an empty tag. There's no start and end tag. It's the start and end tag rolled into one. Or maybe we can't do that. Seems to be griping about it. My mistake. Put the unscript tag in. All right. Now your assignment as far as JavaScript goes, I'll be going over a few more examples next week. My current plan is to go over some more examples next week. You can preview those by looking in the examples for the rest of the semester. I have a couple variations of that menu. I also have an image swap. Can swap between images. And I have a simple JavaScript calculation interacting with forms. Radius of the circle is 2. Circumference is 18.84. All right. That's all I had for this week. My plan is, I must be in a brain fog today. My plan is to go over more JavaScript examples next week and leave week 15 open for you to work on your project that final week and any outstanding assignments that you have and get assistance. A real good idea would be for you to meet with me virtually or in person somewhere between the end of now and the end of the semester to show me what you have for your project. Your project is very important if you look at the number of points on your grade. So be sure you turn something in for your project and don't skip the project altogether if you're having trouble getting everything completed. All right, that's all I have for today. We will see you either in lab or next time.